My name is Lily, and the day my dog barked at a statue changed my entire life. It was just past 8 a.m., and the air still held the coolness of early morning. My golden retriever, Max, bounded down our porch steps as usual, leash-free within the small confines of our manicured front yard. He was as gentle as they came, 8 years old, slightly lazy, and more interested in belly rubs than barking. But today, something was off. Max stood frozen, tail stiff, facing across the street. Then he let out a deep, alert bark. Again. And again. I stepped onto the porch in my slippers, blinking into the sunlight. And then I saw it, the cause of his alarm. A brand new, life-size porcelain cat statue, gleaming white with beady glass eyes, perched perfectly in the middle of Karen Whitmore's yard like a sentry. "You've got to be kidding," I muttered. Max kept barking, low and confused, ears perked and head tilted. It didn't take much to realize he thought it was real. To him, this was a silent, unblinking feline invader taunting him from enemy territory. And that's when she emerged. Karen Whitmore, 70-something, ex-real estate agent, and the living embodiment of every HOA horror story ever told. She came marching out like she was about to host a press conference. Bathrobe cinched tight, clipboard in one hand, iced coffee in the other, sunglasses perched dramatically on her nose despite the morning haze. She glared down at Max like he'd just pooped on her carpet. "Well, well, well. What do we have here?" she said, voice syrupy and loud enough for the entire block to hear. I walked over slowly, trying not to roll my eyes. "Karen, he's just confused. He thinks your statue is a real cat." She tilted her head and gave a mock pout. "Oh, is that so? Because from where I'm standing, your dog is displaying aggressive behavior. That kind of barking is a disruption to the peaceful environment of our neighborhood. He's not being aggressive. He's just barking at a statue," I replied. "It's not like he's attacking anyone." Karen adjusted her sunglasses and pointed at Max like she was performing a citizen's arrest. "That's intimidation, Lily. I don't need a lecture on animal psychology. Section 4B of the HOA guidelines clearly states that pets must not exhibit threatening behavior toward neighboring property." I blinked. "Section what?" She smirked. "You'll be getting a formal complaint. Expect it by this afternoon." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're seriously reporting me? For a dog barking at a statue?" Karen turned without answering, marching back up her driveway like a queen retreating to her castle. Max gave one last bark, almost like he was laughing, and trotted back to me. By lunch, I had a notice taped to my door, "Formal complaint filed. Subject, pet disturbance. Action required." The letter was typed, signed, and dated, clearly prepared in advance. That's when I realized this wasn't just about Max. Karen had declared war. And I was going. The letter sat on my kitchen table like a threat made of paper. Pet disturbance violation. Immediate compliance required or further action may be taken. What further action? Eviction? Fines? Or worse, banishment from the annual block party where they served free sangria and judged people's flower arrangements? I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream or laugh. Karen's complaint was full of carefully chosen words: aggressive canine, continued barking, threat to visual peace, like she'd gone through a legal thesaurus with a highlighter and too much free time. Max, the aggressive canine, was snoring on his back on the couch, paws twitching. A real menace. But I knew better than to brush this off. Karen Whitmore wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was the president of the HOA board, had been for years, and no one dared challenge her. She had rules memorized, favors owed, and a temper that came disguised in pearls and pressed linen. So I did what any rational person would do. I downloaded the entire HOA handbook and started reading. 63 pages. 12 sections. A full page on the acceptable hues for patio furniture. It took me nearly 3 hours and 2 cups of coffee, but I found it. Section 4B, No pet shall engage in continuous behavior that disrupts the peace of neighboring residents. That was it. No mention of barking at inanimate objects. No reference to statues, porcelain or otherwise. I highlighted the clause and printed it out, just in case. But something didn't sit right. Why would Karen risk filing a false complaint if it wasn't already in her favor? That's when I found it. A notice scheduled for vote at next week's HOA meeting, proposed amendment, pet conduct addendum. It was vague, just a line about expanding rules regarding perceived threats from domestic animals. I reread it 3 times before the light bulb went off. Karen wasn't reacting. She was planning. She wanted my dog gone. And she was writing the rulebook to make it happen. And worst of all? She had the support to do it. I dug deeper, into HOA meeting minutes, old emails from the board, and neighborhood group threads. She'd already convinced 2 board members, and the third was her niece. This wasn't about barking. It was a power play. Max stirred, yawned, and walked over to me, resting his head on my lap. I scratched behind his ears, trying to calm my growing fury. She wanted to turn my sweet, aging dog into a community villain. All because he dared bark at a statue. But 2 could play at that game. That night, I knocked on my neighbor Rachel's door. She was one of the few people Karen didn't intimidate. A retired litigator with a sharp wit and a sharper memory. She tried to evict a hummingbird feeder once, Rachel muttered, sipping her wine as I told her everything. We made a list of everyone Karen had targeted. Kids with skateboards, families with wind chimes, a guy who dared paint his front door coral. One neighbor had even received a fine for parking their own bike on their porch. Karen's reign had lasted so long, people had stopped fighting back. But maybe it was time someone did. And I was more than ready. By the end of the night, Rachel gave me a wicked grin and said, if she wants to play politics, let's show her how it's done. The next morning, I woke up with a plan, and a headache from Rachel's very strong wine. Step 1? Prove Max wasn't the problem. Karen's complaint rested on one lie, that Max barked aggressively and repeatedly. But Max barked once at her creepy cat statue, then lost interest. If I could prove he wasn't disruptive, her case would fall apart, and her proposed rule would look like the personal vendetta it was. So, I installed cameras. Not 1. Not 2. 4. 2 on my porch, 1 angled at her front yard from the side fence, and 1 in my living room, watching Max's behavior from inside. All of them recording every second, every movement, every bark, or, more accurately, lack of barks. When I drilled the last one in, Karen popped out of her house like a meerkat. You can't film my property, she screeched from across the street. I'm not. I'm filming mine, I replied sweetly. But thanks for confirming you're watching. She huffed and went back inside. 5 minutes later, she was standing outside with a tape measure, checking how far my side fence camera tilted. By noon, she'd filed another complaint, this time for surveillance harassment. I hadn't even pressed record yet. I handed the letter to Rachel, who burst out laughing. She's panicking, Rachel said. Good. Let's turn up the heat. That afternoon, we went door to door with homemade flyers titled, HOA Gone Too Far? A discussion on fairness and pets. Most neighbors were hesitant at first, nobody wanted to get on Karen's bad side. But as soon as I mentioned the dog barking rule, and how it could be used against any pet, people began to listen. Mrs. Johnson, who owned 2 yappy chihuahuas, paled. You mean they could fine me just for barking inside the house? Exactly. By dinner, we had 11 signatures, enough to request a review of any proposed amendment. Karen didn't expect that. And I still hadn't shown my hand. Because late that night, I reviewed the footage. And found something I didn't even know I was looking for. It happened at 3:17 a.m. The camera on the side fence caught it. Karen, in a bathrobe and slippers, crept into her yard with a flashlight and moved the cat statue closer to my property line. Just by a few inches, but close enough for Max to notice it the next morning. She'd provoked him. She wanted him to bark. I sat back in my chair, stunned. She wasn't just manipulative, she was orchestrating the incident. The next day, I printed a still frame from the video and slid it into a plain manila envelope. No letter. No threats. Just the image of her mid-creep, bathrobe flying, one slipper halfway off, moving her beloved cat statue like a chess piece. I placed it gently in her mailbox. 10 minutes later, I saw her open it through my window. She froze. For the first time since this began, I saw genuine panic on her face. Then rage. Then, fear. She slammed her door shut and didn't come out the rest of the day. The neighborhood was talking now. People watched. And I wasn't done. Because the HOA meeting was just 3 days away. And I was preparing something far better than footage or flyers. I was preparing a presentation. The community clubhouse was packed. I'd never seen more than 5 people show up to an HOA meeting, mostly the same faces sipping lukewarm coffee and nodding at whatever Karen said. But tonight? Nearly every homeowner on the street had shown up. Even grumpy Mr. Peterson, who hadn't been seen in daylight since the mailbox debacle of 2018. Karen stood at the front, still pretending everything was business as usual. Her hair was immaculate. Her clipboard was clutched in both hands. But I noticed her fingers twitching. She knew what was coming. The meeting began with the usual droning agenda: garden inspections, trash bins being left out, a minor squabble about someone's inflatable flamingo. And then came item number 7. Proposal, Pet Conduct Addendum, motion to vote. Karen cleared her throat and began. As you all know, our neighborhood values peace, decorum, and safety. In recent weeks, we've had a rise in disturbances caused by pets, namely dogs barking at all hours, posing a stress to many residents. She glanced at me like she was trying to set me on fire with her eyes. Therefore, I propose we expand the existing rules to restrict any animal behavior deemed threatening or excessive. Rachel raised her hand before she even finished. Who defines excessive? She asked flatly. Karen's smile tightened. The board, of course. And the board is, you, your niece, and Jerry, who owes you $400 from last year's raffle? A low chuckle rippled through the room. Karen's nostrils flared. We have the authority to make decisions in the neighborhood's best interest. I stood up. And I have evidence that this rule is not about the community's best interest. It's personal. I stepped forward and plugged my USB stick into the projector. Karen's face turned white. The screen flickered on, and there she was. Caught in high resolution. At 3:17 a.m. Bathrobe. Flashlight. Slippers. Dragging her cat statue closer to my property line. Gasps filled the room. She moved it, someone whispered. She set up the dog, another muttered. But I wasn't done. I played the second clip, a sped-up reel showing Max lying quietly on the porch, occasionally sniffing the air, wagging his tail. No barking. No aggression. Just an old dog enjoying the breeze. And then the final image, the HOA handbook clause stating that unless a pet created continuous disruption, it wasn't in violation of any rule. I turned back to Karen. You tried to manipulate footage. You provoked my dog. You filed a false complaint. And then, you tried to change the rules to make your lie stick. That's not leadership. That's a vendetta. Karen sputtered, trying to gather herself. That footage is illegally recorded on my property, I cut in. And I already checked the legality. You stood on your lawn. I stood on mine. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Then Rachel stood. I propose a motion, she said clearly. To vote not only against the Pet Conduct Addendum, but also for a vote of no confidence in Karen Whitmore's leadership as HOA president. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Hands started rising. 1, 2, 10, 15. It was unanimous. Karen sat down. Hard. Her face pale, hands shaking. And just like that, her reign was over. Karen disappeared for a few days after the HOA vote. Her car stayed parked. Her blinds stayed closed. No notes, no threats, no whisper campaigns. It was like the Queen of Control had suddenly lost her grip, and the silence was louder than any dog's bark. And as for Max? He was living like royalty. Neighbors dropped by to pet him, slipping him treats and belly rubs like he was the neighborhood hero. Someone even made a tiny crown out of felt and placed it on his head during a Sunday walk. Sir Max of Barkington, Rachel called him. Protector of porches, slayer of statues. Speaking of statues. One morning, Max and I walked past Karen's yard. And there it was, the infamous cat statue. Still standing. Still creepy. Still daring him. Only this time, Max didn't bark. He trotted past it calmly, tail high, nose in the air. Like he knew he'd won. But I had one last loose end to tie up. Because while Karen had lost her seat on the HOA, she still owned that house. And something told me she wasn't done. People like her rarely go down without trying to claw back up. So I filed a formal complaint with animal control, not against her, but in defense of Max. I documented the stress she'd caused, the attempted provocation, and the public spectacle. They launched a quiet investigation into harassment and misuse of HOA power involving pet-related claims. She got a notice. And a fine. I heard her scream through 2 walls and a ficus. But the real surprise? It came a week later. A moving truck. Neighbors gathered at their windows like it was a 4th of July parade. Karen was leaving. No note. No announcement. Just boxes and cardboard and a loud argument with the movers about how to wrap the cursed cat statue without damaging its ears. I stood on my porch with Max, sipping coffee. She looked over one last time. I raised my mug. Hope your new neighborhood likes felines more than canines. She turned red, shoved the statue into the back seat of her car herself, and sped off like the devil was chasing her. And that was that. Or so I thought. A few days later, I found a small package at my door. No address. No name. Just a post-it note taped to the top. For Max, sorry I misjudged him. Inside was a plush toy shaped like a cat. Same arched back. Same frozen snarl. Except this one squeaked when you bit its head. Max loved it. Tore it apart in 15 seconds flat. Rachel nearly choked laughing. Symbolic justice, she said. Poetic. The neighborhood settled down. The new HOA president, Mrs. Johnson, sent out a letter thanking everyone for their patience during the recent disruption and assured us that no unfair rule changes would be made without a full neighborhood vote. Peace had returned to Willow Grove Lane. But I learned something through it all. Sometimes, the people with the loudest rules are the ones hiding the most. Sometimes the best way to defeat someone petty is to stay calm, stay smart, and let the truth bark louder than they ever could. As for Max? He's sleeping soundly these days. Hero of the block. Friend to all. Enemy of one very specific lawn ornament. And if that statue ever returns? Well, we'll be ready.